Okay. I feel a little strange doing this because I know almost all of you and I normally present in a more anonymous room, and we have so many speakers who talk about, you know, all the wonderful nonprofits they're part of and the good they're doing in the world. And I'm kind of here to brag about the trip, but part of Rotary is really learning about the world and learning about other people. And so that's what I'm here to talk about. And as I tried to figure out how am I going to do this in 15 or 20 minutes, I thought, well, one of the things I can do is the animals are fabulous. That's one of the main reasons we went, but I don't need to talk about them. So that's why I ran the slideshow ahead of time. The photography, oh, I need to be by the mic. I'm sorry. The photography was done by my husband. And I need to apologize on his behalf because I had to reduce the resolution of the pictures in order, because my PowerPoint was just massive. So his pictures are crisper than what you saw. The videos are me, so I take full credit or whatever for the videos. And we were there in August of this year, and it was a relatively short trip. We were only there for about 11 days. So we've been to many countries, and some of the countries we've been to, our friends will say, I never even heard of that country, or where is that? I think everybody's heard of Rwanda, not necessarily in a good way. We've seen gorillas in the mist, and all the poaching. We've seen Hotel Rwanda, but probably a lot of people, in fact, Chef was Googling it, a lot of people don't know where it is. Africa is massive. Many of you have probably seen this image. When we see a picture of the globe, you don't realize how big Africa is, because just like you don't realize how big Australia is, but it's massive. We were in Southern Africa when Ebola was going on, and we had friends saying, how can you go to Africa? And it's like Ebola was way, I'm going to step away from that, way up here, way down. And that was like being Seattle in Florida or even further. So it is a really big place, and Rwanda is a really tiny little country. It is, you can see where it is over there. It's landlocked. It's about the size of the state of Maryland, has just over 13 million people, 85% of whom live outside of urban areas, so it's mostly rural. It is really close to the equator, but it's high. They call it Nikoli, the land of 1,000 hills. So it wasn't hot. It was very pleasant. It was a little hot in Kigali, but basically very pleasant because of the altitude. So we visited the capital of Kigali. We visited a place called Akagera National Park in the northeast, National Park in the northwest. And that's why, ultimately why we went. We went to see the gorillas. We got a lot more than that, but that's why we went. One thing you can see is Uganda and the Republic of Congo. I don't know how to get rid of that, because it's not showing up on my screen. Yeah, because I'm not seeing that at all. Okay, good. So Rwanda and Uganda and Democratic Republic of Congo all have, but they all share the volcano park. So there are gorillas and golden monkeys in all countries, and I'll talk a bit more about preservation as I go forward. So we flew into Kigali, spent some time there, drove to Akagera National Park, back through Kigali, drove to the gorillas, and then back to fly home. Drove meaning we were in 2 Land Rovers with drivers. You saw, if you were looking at the video at all, you saw the Land Rovers we were in. Kigali has about 1.3 million people, and it is, the newer parts are like a modern city. You know, it has big buildings, it has banks and apartments and ATM machines that work and all of that. But a lot of it is more like what you would expect to see in a developing country. So the down in the lower left, where there are many bicycles, many motorcycles, not as many cars. When there are cars, it is really jammed up. It is, and you notice they really take advantage of the fact that they have the gorillas, and there's the gorilla moth, the silverback moth. Silverback is what they call the adult male gorillas. because they get silver on their back when they're about 13 years old. And that's what they call the adult male gorillas. It's kind of like Los Angeles in the sense that it's a valley surrounded by mountains, and they don't have the level of pollution control that Los Angeles now has. So it's more like what Los Angeles used to be in terms of some smog in the air. One of the things we really noticed was it's a mix of old and new. So those little guys in the center with the red helmets, those are motorcycle taxis. And if you look down here, let me see, if I put my cursor there, does that show up? No, it really doesn't. Okay. This is an iPad. That's their meter. So they have a seat behind them, and somebody gets on the seat and they hook up with their phone and their meter, and that's the taxi. So that is much more common than what we think of as a taxi, which is a car. Most of the taxis are in fact motorcycles like that. And they also on motorcycles do a lot of package delivery, and they are licensed and regulated. The woman on the left, I never exactly understood how this worked, but that is basically mobile banking. So for people who are in bigger, more international businesses, they have the normal kind of banking stuff that we would expect. But regular people have kind of this parallel system. So that's our trip leader over there with his phone, and he's connecting with her phone. She's giving him cash. So he's making a withdrawal. She has cash. There's usually police around, but these women are stationed all over the city, and they both take deposits and deliver cash. It's kind of a parallel system to a traditional banking system. So they make it work. On the right, one of our friends that we traveled with is a retired master carpenter and construction manager. He pointed out that scaffolding, that's bamboo. And, I was like, I'm not climbing it. So there is a mix of kind of new, modern, and then older stuff. I mean, it's very much in, throughout the world that's not the developed world. They skipped some steps, like this mobile banking. Most people never had landlines in Rwanda. I don't know if there even are landlines. They just went straight to cell phones, and that happened in many places in the world. And they're doing the same kind of thing with this individual banking, which is maybe their own version of cryptocurrency, who knows? But it's just very interesting to see how they're adapting. This is old Kigali. So kind of the original part of the city, as you're driving by and you're looking, you're seeing all these houses jammed together. I guess you call them houses. We've been places that are really poor. This is not that. This is not abject poverty. Because if you look at that, the houses have windows. Most of them have glass in the windows. The houses have doors. You can see the power lines. The houses have electricity. There's not garbage sitting around. So this is people really striving. And yes, they don't have a lot of money, but they're not struggling in the same way that we would think of people truly poor who are struggling. Most of them do not have running water. There's water, there are wells, there's clean water, but most of them do not have running water in their homes. And that's true pretty much throughout the country, except in the true city part of the city. So you could teach this, the genocide part. We certainly spent some time learning about it. In 1994, in about 3 months, the ethnic majority Hutus murdered about 800,000 Tutsi in 3 months. 2 million fled, mostly to Zaire. So pretty much everyone who was alive then was touched in some way by this. They were either a survivor who lost a spouse or lost children, because it was not just men who were killed, it was children, or they were a perpetrator who was imprisoned and then sometimes eventually released. Both of our trip leader and our driver both lost their dads. They were, our trip leader, I think, was 11 years old, and he and his mother and 3 siblings fled to the Congo and lived there for several months. There's a long story of why it happened, how it happened. The memorial that they have in Kigali is an excellent museum. It's kind of like going to the Holocaust Museum if you've been there in Washington, D.C., right? Or New York, Washington, D.C. It's interesting because they talk about a lot of it came from the Belgian occupation, which happened after World War I. And typically, so as part of the treaty, they were essentially given Rwanda because it used to be a colony of Germany. And often colonizers will try to pit people in the country against each other. So they're more focused on each other than trying to get rid of the colonizers. And so they kind of you can't look at a Hutu and a Tutsi and tell who's who. It was pretty much invented by the Belgians and then adopted. The level of propaganda and things that they said were incredible. They talked about the Tutsis being cockroaches and they wanted to eradicate them from the face of the earth. And so it was just the level of propaganda that went on. There were periodic smaller genocides over the course of about, 20 years. The Belgians left in the early 60s, and it came to a peak in 1994. The UN and the international community kind of stood by and watched. There were forces in Uganda displaced Tutsi and Hutu who didn't believe in that level of discrimination, who basically formed a militia, and they got help. So they came in, and other African countries came in, and they were the ones that put a stop to it. There were trials afterwards. Many went to prison. And then after about 15 years, they were, I don't know how to exactly describe it, but many of them were given an option if they actually admitted their wrongdoing. Instead, I was wrong, certainly I was the victim of propaganda, but still, I was wrong. I accept my responsibility. I apologize. They were released. People who would not do that are still in prison. So it's a country that has really, and I hope I'm representing it correctly, it is a country that has really come to grips with what happened and is moving forward. And it's amazing. And that's a quote from our trip leader, but you hear it everywhere, is they believe that distinction is completely arbitrary and there's really no difference. And they don't even talk about it anymore. We don't talk about who's Tutsi. We're Rwandans. And that is what everyone will tell you. So it was very impressive, but also obviously very, very sad and horrific. And there are memorials all around the country because it was everywhere. It wasn't just in Kigali. We visited a reconciliation village, which you know about, and many of them were, some of them were NGOs and some of them were government sponsored. They're villages where the population is a mixture of perpetrators and survivors. The one we visited was, I would say, about 70-30, 70% survivors and 30% perpetrators. Living together, they apply to live here. A lot of it is how they live is subsidized to some extent. They've even had situations where a perpetrator and a survivor get married. So they are really learning to live together and to say we are all Rwandans. A couple of things I want to point out is, look at how clean that village is. And I don't think they cleaned it up just for us. The country was clean. It was incredible. That woman is a widow. That's her house. Now, it doesn't have a door and a window. It's still kind of in progress. And it's hard to see, but she is standing next to her cow. So this village is an agricultural village, but it's not farming like we think of farming, where you have individual farms. People live in a village, and the fields are, to some extent, they're communal, and some are farmed by one family. So there's farm fields all around the village, and they usually own their animals. And that's a pig. And then he is showing us, that's the village, this is the village leader. who's elected, and he's showing us how they harvest. And you'll see more about that. It was quite an experience. They fed us lunch and sang for us. And, you know, one of those things I showed on the other one was listening to them sing. Food production in Rwanda. We drove from one end of the country to another. I never saw a tractor. I never even saw an oxen with a plow. It's manual. They produce a lot of food, a lot of their own food. So they import very little. They eat a very diverse and healthy diet, and they do it by hand. So you can see they've got picks and they've got hose, and these little boys are standing next to cassava that are drying. And that one is actually taken in the village we visited. Kind of like sweet potatoes. It's a root vegetable. So they really are the epitome of eating locally, because the kind of the staple of the diet varies depending upon what part of the country you're in. Sometimes it's potatoes, sometimes it's cassava, sometimes it's sweet potatoes. It just varies on which grows the best. But they import dairy. They just don't import a lot. They grow most of their own food. And they don't really have, I'm sure there are some in Kigali, but they don't really have grocery stores as we would think of grocery stores. They have markets. And you can see the markets can be very, very large. So there are a lot of people at that market. This is a gentleman that has a little stall in the market where he's actually selling packaged goods. There were very few packaged goods. It was things like flour and cooking oil and some oatmeal and things like that, but almost everything is fresh. So they eat hardly any packaged goods. And you can see it's all very clean, and then stuff's just laid out, and you go and you pick it and you weigh it. And and this is spices. You can see there's little mounds of spices there. So they're selling them, and they put it in a little baggie for you. I don't know what they put it in, because one of the things they emphasized to us is they're really focused on protecting the environment. So you're not supposed to bring in single-use plastic bags. So they're trying very hard not to do that. Transportation was interesting. There are cars, there are trucks, but in rural Rwanda, they use bicycles. And they often can't, there's bamboo on a bicycle. He can't ride that. He's walking the bike, and it took two of them because that weighs a lot. So the bikes are reinforced with steel. If they're riding the bike, they often have modified their sandals with tire rubber on the bottom of the sandal because the brakes aren't strong enough to stop it. So they have to put their feet down when they're going down the hills. But you can see we have bamboo, we have pineapples, over there we have bananas, more bamboo. This guy, red things, that's beer. So they transport almost everything using bicycles. It's amazing. And the women. There are more women than men now, because more men were killed in the genocide. So there are many women who are widows, many women who had an expectation of being home with their kids, who now need to support themselves. So there are many organizations that are educating women and supporting them as they learn to support themselves. And you can see up here on the left, those women are spinning wool. I have one of those in my house that was my great-grandmother's. And they had this room full of these spinning wheels, and they know how to use them, and they're really fast. The woman on the right is a seamstress, that one's in Kigali, who's learning to sew. You can see the stuff on the table is all the goodies I couldn't resist. So I like to support the local economy when I shop, and our house is overflowing. They are making baskets, and we had the opportunity to learn to do some of that. The woman in the middle is the master, I don't know what you would call her, but she's the master at dyeing wool. So she has been doing this for years, and she knows all the different plants to get the different colors she wants. And so she was showing us all the ways that she gets the color, and she knows how long to to boil it to get that color. And she had an apprentice who was learning the ropes. And the women, they can carry anything on their heads. It's incredible. And they don't have, there's nothing there holding it. Because we try, you know, they showed us, they just, and we tried to balance, and we couldn't do it. Our guide could, he's a man, but he could do it. And they also carry their babies. So you can see here, see the little feet? She's got a baby on her back. That's the, or a toddler on her back, and that's the feet. So everywhere you go, you see women with things on their heads. And it's incredible. Sometimes they have massive things on their heads. And the children, this is a very young country. There are many, many children. And one of the things to note here is, as I said, this is not abject poverty. These are not rich people, but they don't look hungry and emaciated, do they? They look fine. They, you know, they need a lot, but you don't have this sense of, oh my gosh. You have a sense of they're moving forward, and they're trying to educate their children, and they're trying to provide for their families, and they're basically a happy, optimistic people. This was, I don't know why they have summer vacation, because they're right at the equator, but they were not in school. School was not in session in August, but kind of the whole town came because we were coming. We travel with an organization typically called Overseas Adventure Travel, and they have a foundation called Grand Circle Foundation. And in every country that they travel to, they usually have at least one thing that they sponsor, and it's often a school. And so this school was sponsored by Overseas Adventure Travel. And so they all came to thank us. So the kids all came, they sang, and you can see, we'd take pictures and we'd show them their picture, and they were so excited to see us. And this is what a school looks like. And again, it looks pretty bare, but compared to others I've seen, it's actually not bad. They teach kind of in English. We had presentations by a couple of the teachers, and they could speak English fairly well in terms of their presentation and what they were, but they were not what I would call conversational, because when we would ask them a question, they would turn to our guide to have him translate. So as I think about what are some of the things I would do, maybe one of them would be going and helping their teachers with their English, with their conversational English, going and spending a couple weeks with them when they're not teaching to help them with their English. On the lower right, that's their kitchen. They feed lunch to the kids. They have a couple giant pots and fire, and that's the next thing that Grand Circle is going to do, is help them get a more modern kitchen. But what we did was we delivered school supplies. So those boxes are notebooks and pencils. So every kid gets a couple notebooks and some pencils, because they don't have that capability, and they all walk to school. But you can see, you know, there's a science room with stuff on the walls. They had some little, they weren't iPads, they were more primitive than that, but they had kind of a computer lab. So they're, you know, they're trying, and they're really focused on educating our children. And everywhere we went, tourism is very important in this country, and they all know it, and they all appreciate the tourists. I think they dance whether we're there or not, but they certainly always danced and sang for us, as you heard if you were listening to the videos before I started. This is several different places where we had dance performances. This is the Reconciliation Village. So the whole town was there, greeting us, glad that we were there, appreciative of our help, because we brought them some packaged food and stuff that's not easy for them to get. But they are always, you know, they're happy, they're dancing, they're playing the music. You can see the men have bells. They have those things wrapped around their leg that are bells, so that it's like having tap shoes, but it's bells instead. And I never quite understood the wigs, but that was a common thing, is to have those wigs like the guys in the lower corner, and then they whistle their head. So, and we often joined them dancing. They invited us to join them. One of the things about Rwanda is they're very focused on protecting animals and the environment and promoting tourism. If you saw the Diane Fossey movie, it was horrible. Poaching was a huge problem. The gorilla population, I think, was down to about 500, and now it's up to 1,300. The gorillas are in Rwanda, Uganda, and the Congo. About half of them are in Rwanda and doing the best of three, protecting them. The Congo is the worst. They're just in tomorrow. Guide said I wouldn't go to Congo now, too scary. So, but they are doing a really good job of protecting them, and they're using both a carrot and a stick. So on the left, you'll see those were our porters. So when you trek to go to see the gorillas, it's about ours was an easy trek, so it was about an hour to get to the gorillas. And you go first through potato fields, then through a bamboo forest, which is fairly easy. And then you go through a eucalyptus forest, which is fairly dense, and you have to wear gaiters around your legs because there are stinging nettles and fire ants potentially, although we didn't have any issues. You wear long sleeves and gloves and all of that. But everyone has a porter. So these gentlemen were our porters, one per person. So the way that you see the gorillas is there are 12 families. So in a day, they do 96 passes to see the gorillas, 96. So there are groups of 8, and then you have a guide and there's trackers who know where the gorillas are. And you trek to get there, which in our case was an hour, and then you have an hour with the gorillas, and then you trek to get back. So you have your porter who's helping you during the trek. They carry your day pack. They stop and say, would you like some water? They give you a hiking pole, and they help you whenever it's a little bit tough when you're going uphill or over rocks or whatever. My guy would come and grab my hand and make sure I was okay. Many of those porters used to be poachers. So now they know the jungle, they know the gorillas, but now they're making money in a good way instead of in a bad way. So they, I don't know which ones were poachers. They didn't ever talk about it, but I know that some of them used to be poachers. So that's the carrot. Everyone pays $1,500 per person. It's built into our tour cost, but $1,500 per person to see the gorillas. And they use that money for conservation efforts, for government projects. 15% goes to the local communities right around where the gorillas are. So you can see there's roads, there's schools there. So that tourism, that protecting the gorillas is really going back to the community. I'm sure there's corruption in Rwanda, but nothing like most places. You really can see the impact that most of the money that comes in really is going to doing good. There still are poachers. Many of them are not Rwandan, some are. So we saw this in Akagira. They train dogs to look for poachers. So this is a trainer. He's got this really thick padding on so the dogs can't bite through it. But they showed us a demonstration of how they train the dogs to make the rounds and look for poachers. And then this on the lower right is an interesting thing. In the potato fields that you go through before you get to either see we trekked one day to see gorillas and the next day to see golden monkeys. The animals come down and eat the potatoes because, that's easy. And they used to kill the animals that came down and ate the potatoes. It could be the gorillas, it could be the monkeys, it could be mountain buffalo, it could be elephants. But now they encourage them, well, they punish them if they kill them, but they also encourage them to have other methods of deterring those animals. So they have these little huts in their potato field, and people from the community take turns spending the night there. So they're in that hut, and if they detect that there are animals, they shine lights and make loud noises. So that was a little, so they're really trying very hard to protect the animals, protect the environment, and promote tourism and benefit from it. So, I feel guilty that I am privileged enough to go, but I'm really glad that I could do it and glad that I could help. So we went to Rwanda to see, when everybody asked me, why are you going to Rwanda? My answer was to see the gorillas. And it was fabulous. In Akagera, we saw many other animals. You saw pictures of giraffe and elephant and all that. That isn't as plentiful as the game in Southern Africa or Kenya or Tanzania. So if your main objective is seeing lots of animals, Rwanda's not the place to go. But if you want to see some animals and the gorillas and the golden monkeys, it's fabulous. But the thing we didn't expect was how positive we would feel about the people, the country, what they're accomplishing, and where they're going. Because we don't always feel that way when we come back. When we came back from India, we kind of looked at each other and where do we start fixing this? You know, it's garbage everywhere. There's no potable water. It's just, I mean, I loved India, but I don't know. But in Rwanda, we felt like they are making tremendous progress. They're very proud of their country. They're all proud to be Rwandans, proud in a good way. They're embracing tourism and doing a great job of it. They treat tourists well. They're not overrun. They're really managing it well so that they can benefit from it. It's a very young country, very focused on educating their children. They're aware of their history, but moving forward. So it was fabulous. It was absolutely fabulous. Questions? Where? South America, Easter Island in Patagonia. We're being taped, I shouldn't say, right? Soon, yeah. Anything else?
Stay around for a few minutes.
I will stay around, yeah.
Afterwards.
Yep.
Okay.
I will.
They're just overwhelmed at this point, I think. Thank you very much. This is so.
Yes.
When is the current